Today we've invited Leah Stuhltrager, and Leah has worked on the intersection of technology and the cultural sector for many years. Originally from New York, but resident, I think, for about 10 years in Berlin. And she's created a cultural organization in Berlin called The Y. Very interesting if you go and look at the website. Career highlights include, I'm going to read this because it's so long, I mean, really. And I'm not going to read all of them because that would be longer than the seminar. The Lincoln Center, Coachella, Halle, Contemporary Istanbul, Circulo de Bellas Artes, which I presume is the one in Madrid, the Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg, and so on and so forth. She serves on the board as a board member of TEDx in Berlin. She often advises countries on innovation and urban planning, and has been retained by VC firms for insight in investing and placement of emerging creative technologies.
Thank you for having me. I think it's important for me to start very quickly by saying how I got to Berlin. After listening to that talk, I'd just like to say that how I got to Berlin was in 2009, 2008 and 2009, which Kate discussed. There was a huge financial collapse. And I was a gallery that did very well. I was one of the first galleries in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and one of the bigger ones. I had even outside space. So in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that's kind of unheard of, and I had it. But in 2008 and 2009, I was faced with the decision on what to do and how to grow, how to continue to be successful. And my decision was to downsize and to move to Berlin. I kept my New York gallery, and I had what I thought was going to be a temporary project in Berlin, using sort of the same budget, but reallocating it in a different way. And what I found was that in Berlin, I soared. My business went through the roof. I never expected that, but it was a time of change and a time of great fear, if I'm going to be quite honest, of those changes, of changing what I always did that had always suited me to something that opened up a whole new world and opportunities for me. And the second part of that, where I am going to start my conversation, is that I come from a sector of private art dealing and the business of art dealing and the business of art marketing and the business of the cultural business. So that's where I'm going to approach this. My talk today, I'm going to not tell you what to do. No one can tell you those things. No one can give you answers. But what I can say is that I have 3 very important market trends that are emerging that will affect the cultural industry, and it will affect us all. It doesn't matter if you're a music producer or a fashionista or a writer or a museum or a gallerist. These are going to affect you because they're social cultural changes that were brought on by the pandemic. And the other thing I was going to say is that because of where I'm coming from, that I am from that business marketing side, I tend to talk about art, which I love, which is my passion, which is my hobby, and which is my life, also as a business. And I in changing how I talked about it, and that's the first thing I'm going to say, in changing how I talked about art. When I used to say I'm a gallerist and I represent artists, it was a very small target audience. It was collectors, and it was people that were interested in visiting or viewing those sort of installations or those sort of art projects that I did. When I started talking and swinging it from being a gallery and providing studio space for the artists and exhibitions to saying I'm having an event and we are an agency and I produce creative content, all of a sudden the world changed. And I was still doing the same art. I was doing it at a bigger scale with bigger budgets for more people. And it's really in learning how to speak the language to expand to those that are going to be important in the years to come, because we can't continue to have the same audiences. Just like I couldn't in 2008, no matter how much it hurt me to move from New York, I proved to myself, which I didn't think was going to happen, that it was a good move. So without further ado, I'm going to go into 3 different trends that I see, and I'm going to really kind of get into detail with some examples and ways that it can be incorporated into a business plan proactively. I think the big running theme for today is it's not a time to sit and hold tight for times that are not going to come back. The challenge that we have to rise to is actually being better. It's not a challenge of trying to remain who we are. The first thing that I see as a social cultural change completely is a movement from the fear of missing out experiences to embracing deeply personal experiences. And where I'm going to start with these trends is very broad. However, I'm going to get more detailed. And I'm hoping I'm picking trends that nobody even would argue, because this is a trend that you can see across the board. What do I mean by that? I mean that there's a rise of a superficial, there was this rise of a superficial surface level engagement. We have things like the Museum of Ice Cream. And yes, that's art and design. It's wonderful, but you know, it is a superficial sort of experience. Or the challenges, the viral challenges. Can you eat the cinnamon? Can you dunk the water? All of these things may be for good causes, but they're very superficial challenges. And that has actually waned very, very hard due to the cultural shifts. And the forced isolation by default has put an emphasis on introspection and responsible actions. It's something Kate was talking briefly about at the end. You're seeing that. It's no longer about superficialness. It's no longer about grandiose photos or photos to prove you were there, or photos to say, look at what I have. That is extremely inappropriate at this point. As a social shift, that is dramatic. And most significantly, you can see that in people checking out, stepping back and going off the grid. They're no longer afraid of keeping up. That is a global shift in how people are thinking about their time. And it will, the main takeaway from that for people having this isolation this time out is that it's not going to cause a personal implosion, but it's going to fuel isolation, stepping back, thinking for yourself in a different way, being forced to think in a different way than just continue what's routine and what we feel is standard or the right way. Being forced to think differently, it's not going to cause an implosion, and it's going to fuel better focused ideas, more efficient work, more valued expenditures of both time personally and professionally. Now, how does this actually fit into the market? You have the rise of things like the joy of missing out, which is as important right now, if not more important, and eclipsing the fear of missing out. And hopefully we're going to see that more and more. I'm excited by it. You're going to see work environment, of course, you're going to see work environments going digital. Once inconceivable, now the proven business model is a game changer. You're going to go for top-down budgets and an increasingly preferred means of employees to stay at home, to work from home, at least part-time. You're also opening yourself to a workforce, which I find very exciting, that it's a work platform, a virtual work platform, at least partial, opens it up to equality in ways that our workforces never have been, whether that is to somebody who has autism, to a woman with a child, to people that are outside your locality. You're talking about equality that you should be embracing, and that is exciting to see in the culture coming out of this. You have another example of this market trend, Netflix and chill. This is something Kate said. And I'm going to expound on that in saying that not only are people, you know, watching more online, but we have to ask why and what that's saying. There's been a groundbreaking year of award-nominated programming before COVID. Leading into before COVID, you still had these people that were choosing, and not these people, you had a general population that was choosing to stay at home rather than go out to a sensory experience in a theater. They're choosing a private, quiet moment, is finding that more meaningful. As cultural providers, we have to listen to that. That's extremely important. And lastly, in this market trend, I have an example of the rise of social justice and social movements. And there's this idea of wokeness, which is a very, very tightrope walk. And you're seeing that do wonderful, amazing things to bring voices to be heard. I am so proud of the fact that people are actually now being heard that have been fighting for decades, generations to be heard. I am not one of those people, but I am so happy to hear more and listen more. The most important thing that we can say in that is that you can't take for granted that this movement is not yours or that movement is not yours, but that they matter. And you're seeing that have pluses and minuses. And a minus, I'll say, for something to learn from was the Philip Guston exhibit that was just canceled, because the way that people marketed and talked about Philip Guston, and I love Philip Guston, if it was discussed in a way that actually was relevant to today and to what is happening now, the Philip Guston exhibit would not have needed to be canceled. The fact that they did not hear and listen to what audiences were saying going into that led to a problem with Philip Guston, of all people. The learnings from this, the cultural shift in what people are engaging and how people are engaging. They're looking for personal journeys. They're not looking for public displays. They're looking for it to be meaningful to them, for their actions to matter. There's a market shift in people and how they will spend their leisure time and their leisure money. That will not go back to normal. It will not go back to the normal that we knew 2 years ago. It's not going to. There's a different public perspective on what is tolerable, what people are willing to think of as a cultural and social context and responsibility and programming. All of that is being considered in a very new light, and I welcome it, because to get audiences that want to think and want to engage on a deeper level and not that superficial level is a welcome change for me. For me, I'm happy to see that. And lastly, for this, how can we actually get this into a business plan? Like, what does it mean to cultural institutions? Here's some examples. Inclusion awareness and commitment actions, not superficial. Programming that is of a personal nature. You see more artists in residence programs. You see and fabulous things like David Byrne and sing-alongs, open sing-alongs. You see co-creating outlets. You see very different means of people from all over that are not particularly artistically inclined to become engaged and feel that they matter. And because of that, because of them being part of what is going on, they actually want to stay and see it grow, and they have a vested interest in it. That is the positioning from the cultural business that I would take. Online art experiences that are meaningful. You cannot just have your website and your social media. I'm going to go into that in a moment, or even just a streamed event. Those are not, they're very great starts, but they're not where you need to be to have that online be a revenue and an asset to your business. Last but not least, the ticketing. One thing that people are doing that is really smart is they're ticketing to limited edition runs or mobile immersive happenings that are extremely innovative. And there's a physical presence that's built in the very art. It's built into the art in a function. For example, Superblue. And if you guys are familiar with Pace and others, are doing these new initiatives where it's short run projects, a high ticket sale, and it's meaningful for the person to be there physically because the art responds to them and they can feel it, it matters. Their presence is actually creating that art, and it's a very good response to this. The second big trend that I see is that there's quality swinging back from, and this is something David was mentioning a little bit in previous conversations, quality swinging back, I'm sorry, quantity leaving the stage, and there being a shift or a swing back to quality, and scale transitioning to scope. We've been going in as a global cultural world, doesn't matter, I have like examples that I'm gonna get to in a moment from all over the world. It got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we got to the point where we were looking at 50,000 square foot spaces, malls being converted by artist groups, which is a wonderful thing. However, it's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable business plan. The other kind of swing in that is, so in a parallel to the fundamental shift in what people are valuing and how they're spending their time, there is an emerging trend in rebutting that sense of expenditure, that sense of putting that value or that budget towards scale and not towards scope and not towards quality. That, you know, it's a thing that to me is almost too late to happen, because I really feel very badly for a lot of the projects that really took advantage of amazing opportunities to grow very quickly, very quickly, without a long-term vision of sustainability and stability, without it be dependent on things that they thought were always going to be there. And that's not a good business plan. So on that, I'm going to give you some examples. Now you're seeing things of this trend, such as tiny homes. You're seeing exodus from cities to suburbs. You're seeing countries that are really, quite honestly, having mass changes of their inner cities. And you're having the nomad movement. You're having things such as Marie Kondo telling you, keep what you love, all else can go. You have mega co-working spaces publicly collapsing on such a scale that they're making headlines for being disasters, for being too big and too overvalued too quickly. Not that they deserve it. I really feel that they had good places in their heart, but that's the reality of not understanding a market, and that it has trends and thinking things will always be there. You have, for example, you have not only the mega immersion spaces and the mega co-working spaces, you also have actual commercial property dropping. So you are in a position where you have people that are having hard times to pay rent, where the rents are actually lower right now if they were to renegotiate or find a different space. And that's really interesting to me. And you also have the online versus store buying, and you have, that's kind of the last nail in our commercial commerce. You see people that are really doing commercialism in a different way and changing how they're working with creatives. And for example, you have, this is kind of an older example, but Red Bull and Red Bull Music Academy, brilliant solution. You have Karstadt, which is one of the big mega department stores in Germany, doing a full circular economy, used clothing project with artists. And throughout the whole store. You have experience brand marketing by Levi's and Nike's, where they're using artists to create immersive physicality spaces, where it's about customizing your jeans or customizing or getting your special shoes that are one of a kind. The learnings from this as cultural institutions, we can't wait for 2019 return. We already said that. Like, I think that's agreed on the people that have talked thus far. But the other thing is that it's really, I'm trying to drill in that it's changing the market, and it's changing specifically physical space and how that's going to be a venue or a vehicle for revenue. It's really, really changing that. And especially for the bigger venues. And that doesn't mean that you have to, you know, it just means you have to think about it differently, in my opinion. And the last thing I'm going to say is that circular economy, which is also something that Kate kind of touched into, is a big trend coming out of this, going into business plan, being responsible for your production, for your reuse, for who you are partnering with, for example. It is a very deep-rooted way to actually take these learnings and make them a positive way of your business plan, and not just for now, but for years to come. Shared examples, specific examples, shared gallery spaces, and shared merging of cultural projects. You have Gavin Brown and Barbara Gladstone. You have Billboard and Rolling Stone merging this month. You have gallery shares, repurposing of space for identified art and local community needs, such as PS1's music, which has been around for a while, but that was really revolutionary, and I still see its importance today. Again, one that's a few years old, but revolutionary, New Ink, which is the new museum's accelerator program for creative technology, artists that are working in new ways, an actual accelerator program. You have another great example of thinking outside the box on use of space, the Whitney's Curator program, or Christie's Masters program. You have all of these different ways of looking at space and reallocating it into a different revenue stream. The last thing is that people are not just putting on hold their plans, they're having to cancel them and restructure physically, including downsizing their workforce. And that is a reality that is very, very real and needs to be built into a business plan. Examples of that, you have South by Southwest, Meow Wolf, Burning Man. Burning Man went virtual this year. I guarantee the staff of that was minuscule. And not only that, but you're looking at actually a revenue change to entire cities, like South by Southwest revenue stream to Austin is incredible. And Burning Man to the Coachella Valley is incredible. How do we actually have a business plan moving forward that would not rely solely on a single event for the year? And I think cultural institutions, that's very relevant. A big one on this, smart networks. Right now you have companies, people, organizations across industries, across all industries, joining into these mini societies, self-governing alliances, and based on their sharing of how they're sharing data or their technology network, they're becoming actual mini societies. I call them smart networks. The way that we have that now, and that's a trend that's gone from social media, right? And that being owned as a platform that we share, owned by a third party, to owning our own networks, owning the way that we can actually monetize them and make them into businesses that's a respectful way, that's transparent, that has privacy. Ways that specifically can be kind of implemented into a business plan. Decentralization, you've got blockchain, you've got digital currency, long-term digitalization alliances, such as looking at the tech as a medium and not as a tool, as a medium. So looking at partnering with the AR and VR, looking at partnering with the motion tracking, looking at partnering at these things that make it a better, enjoyable experience for your visitors, but also bring in a way for virtual visitors to come in. And lastly, give you insights that you wouldn't otherwise have, which brings me to the last bit of my conversation today. And that is the localization and diversification, the biggest one on the list. Tourism, there's a paradigm shift. And it's not just about the restrictions of the temporary. It's about a near time stability in planning leisure travel, or travel alone for people that would generally be those that would go to a place for culture. And there's just it's not just about the boundaries, but the security and longer term planning and in finances that people are not making those trips and are not going to be making those trips in any near time soon, not even with border restrictions lifted. There's not the stability there. There's not the faith, actually. The reality of the lack of tourism will create, this is an important one, a need for localization. What does that mean? That means you need to look at those numbers Kate was talking about of who your clients were, who was your audience. If you had a large international audience, you're gonna have to look at how to make that localization move fairly quickly, because you're looking at, I think David, you said 1 year, I would say probably 1.5 years to 2 of localization being a main part. And that's from A to Z, so that the place that you're physically in, finding ways to engage that community, requiring a shift to relying from a traditional culture venue or traditional revenue streams to a set of streams that's not traditional venue streams, just not. I talked about smart networks, but examples of this trend. You have the Berlin Club Commission, which did United We Stream, which was an incredible case study. Basically, long story short, the clubs in Berlin all faced COVID. They couldn't open, and they got together and formed a very loosely fitting organization of local people in the same boat, in this, experiencing the same things. Within a month and a half, they had raised $1 million and changed the amount that they were making as a group of clubs entirely to digital streaming, from not having that even be a consideration in the months prior. Last I checked, they had over 4 million streams, and that was some time ago. All hats off to them. Grassroots localization, great example. You have OnlyFans is a great example of this. You have Masterclass, which is a great example of this. Masterclass, you have, for example, people like David Sedaris teaching a class I can go to for 10 euro, 15 euro. Bring it on, I'll go. You have the best of the best that are looking at actually sharing their craftsmanship, themselves, actually, their art themselves in a whole new personal way, which gets back to that first trend that I was talking about. And the last two I'm going to say, which were really kind of funny examples, but very telling and very, very important to look as case studies, was the Cowboy Museum. If you guys didn't see what happened there, but when they went into COVID, no one was in the museum. And they only had a security guard. So the security guard became the Twitter person, and their Twitter numbers became through the roof, because it wasn't, I'm going to post, this painting and talk about it. It was somebody talking about their personal findings along the way, funny, sometimes completely wrong. People corrected him. People wanted to talk to him about it and teach him about it. And another one that's along that same line is in Philadelphia. They have a pretty scrappy, Philadelphia's a poor city, and your sports are related to how much taxes you have, and Philly's poor. And I'm a Philly girl. I'm born in Philly, raised in New York, but born in Philly. And they had a mascot for one of their teams that's called Gritty. And Gritty was just like this monster. He doesn't even have a shape. His social media is hysterical, and he won all the Web Awards last year, all of them. So you're talking about a sports franchise winning, technology awards like the Webby Awards. And what that did to driving business and driving people to watch online, to buy those tickets and fill that stadium, to buy the merchandise, and to be on the same team as that mascot, as that character, as that persona, you could not buy better. So the learnings from that are to embrace reinvention, get to know the digitalization components so that you understand not just how to use them, but how they are built. I know everybody's going to hate me when I say this, and I'm telling you, I hate it myself, but I have to do it, and we all do. You need to know the back end as well as the front end. For example, Avada, it's no longer, you need to know how that website works, how to build it, how it actually functions. If you don't, you need somebody on your team to have in that meeting to explain it. To Hootsuite, to knowing not only how to use it, but how it works, how to leverage it. Yoast, for example, for social media, animated GIFs, to innovations such as geocaching, QR codes, motion tracking, 360 video, AR, VR, all of these things. You really, not that you need to be an expert in it, but you need to know the back end to really understand what they can do for you. Lastly, in this trend, the big important one is to understand your big data. And what I mean by that is that is the biggest insights that you can get. It's not about your numbers and what people are telling you when they fill out their little questionnaires, or you know, what their comments are. It is actually that big data. And what I mean by that is knowing what people are clicking on, where they're coming to your site from, what pages they're looking at, how long they're staying, what they're not looking at, what they're not interested in finding out more about. And really looking at that and having real conversations with the big data team, the business intelligence teams, and the curatorial planning team, the business development team, the community outreach team, so that everybody's understanding what that audience is saying to you. It's our time to listen. And that doesn't mean that we change our curation style, but it means we have a better informed understanding of how we need to talk, the words we need to use, and to understand how to reach that audience. That's really the key to the modern world. So I'm going to sum up if I have one more minute. Not David, do I have 1 minute? Okay. 1 minute? Okay. So long story short, all of this change is really not a fun thing. It's not happy times, it's scary times, it's fearful times, but it can also be exciting. And the pitfalls, watch out for. And I kind of want to we can talk about all the great things. I want to bring up the pitfalls. Change fatigue. Too much, too fast. You need to prioritize. Do not go big. Learn from the problems of the past. Dictating versus leading. Think hard and deep, and not just about your words, but your actions. They need to be inspiring, and not divisive. Include the different people on your team than you normally would, especially younger, especially people that aren't coming from the same background as you. It's extremely important. And communication versus engagement, they are not the same thing.